Thank you for being here. I know that it's a long week with a lot of great stuff happening, and especially if you were in class last night, those of you who had a big night last night and then have had the time to show up here, I'm glad that you're here. I know that I've been hearing such great feedback from attendees for each of these classes. So this is a moment in the summer writing retreat when we like to get to know our instructors a little bit better, give the other attendees who aren't in a particular instructor's class the chance to get to know the instructor a little better. And also, for the first time last year, we did this format where we really gave each of these wonderful, wonderful women an opportunity to say something about any books that they've been reading that they feel would be inspiring to writers, would give you some sort of craft nugget, or just might turn on your writer's brain and your writer's soul a little bit more as you're moving through this month. So I am gonna just really hand it over to them to start on their list, and then also to say, please, each of you feel free to chat with each other about a book if you've heard or if you've read a book that one of your fellow instructors mentions. And I may ask you some questions too as we get into it. So I think we'll actually start I'm always putting her on the hot seat, but we're going to start in order of the classes. So Monday night is Donna M. Johnson teaching our memoir class. And so Donna, talk to us a little bit about this wonderful collection of books that you're happy to recommend today. Oh, you might be muted, my friend.
First of all, I kind of I was thinking about books I love, and I was also thinking about what we've been talking about in class, like one of the points we've been hammering on a little bit, and that is the sort of the way that really powerful memoir often filters facts through imagination, right? And so as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about sort of more highly imagined works of mostly nonfiction. And most of my, like I said, most of my choices turned out to be pretty lyrical because of that. But we'll start with the numero uno, Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. It is a work of auto fiction, meaning it is drawn from his life. This is actually highly drawn from his life. The story, or the situation is rather, that his mother and grandmother survived the Vietnam War. And he was actually born, I think, in a rice paddy in Vietnam. And they were immigrants here in the US. Or they are immigrants here in the US. And his, the book, first of all, Ocean is a poet. And the book is addressed to his mother in a letter. And the really moving part to me, the language is gorgeous, of course, but the really moving part is the book is addressed to his mother, and she can neither speak English, which of course he's fluent in, and she's illiterate in both languages. And so the book speaks to, I think, those poignant divides that language both can bridge and in a lot of cases can't bridge. Can I read just one little short, tiny? Yeah, okay. The first time you hit me, I must have been 4. A hand, a flash, a reckoning, my mouth a blaze of touch. The time I tried to teach you to read the way Mrs. Callahan taught me, my lips to your ear, my hand on yours, the words moving underneath the shadows we made. But that act, a son teaching his mother, reversed our hierarchies and with it our identities, which in this country were already tenuous and tethered. After the stutters and false starts, the sentences warped or locked in your throat, after the embarrassment of failure, you slammed the book shut. I don't need to read, you said. Your expression crunched and you pushed away from the table. I can see it's gotten me this far, hasn't it? So I just, the language is so precise and filled with meaning, and it comes out of his head, not from the facts of the situation, right? We're not making up facts, but we take the facts and then we jump into the world of imagination, and he does it beautifully. I'll stop.
No, it's
Full
wonderful.
stop.
All right. And we'll sort of round robin so that you guys each get a chance to mention a book, and then we'll kind of go on to the next person and keep going around. So Charlotte, your Tuesday night. So you get to, and thank you, Donna. I've had that book actually, I'm going to say, on my shelf for a long time. And it's one of those books that we were talking before this started, ire'ne, that I keep thinking, I need to read this and take it off my shelf. So now you've inspired me. Thank you. So Charlotte, what do you got for us?
Well, I also want to say thank you to Donna. That was just amazing to have a reading. I'm into this thing right now, like when people gather, it's sacred. And so like to have a reading to kind of mark that sacredness. I don't know. And I just had a really nice conversation with my mom that choked me up. So I'm all cheeseball right now.
Perfect.
So everyone who knows me is like, when is she going to read a different book? So this is We the Animals by Justin Torres. I just think this is absolutely gorgeous. And I'm rereading it again. I mean, I read it when I chose it for the class, but I'm rereading it right now. And so one of the things that we're working on is, how do you consider the reader? How do you make them uncomfortable but not unwelcome? And so like our characters need to do things that we wouldn't normally. And so that's how I'm really looking at this book, is like, it is willing to write scenes that make you have a visceral response. Like, I'm very nervous for the children, or I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. And that's actually why we keep reading. We want to see if the kids are going to be okay, if the mom is going to be okay, if there's a reversal of character for anyone. So I know that, yes, Charlotte talks about We the Animals by Justin Torres all the time. We did this exercise last night. It was a new one. It's like, and we brainstormed as a class. Let's say it's not COVID and someone invited you over to their house to stay for 2 days, and what could they do to make you feel uncomfortable but not unwelcome? So we started talking about that stuff as a way to kind of generate or not generate, but like help us hone our ideas about how you make readers uncomfortable. It was really fun. People like, talk politics in bed. Like, what? Get out of my, it was just really fun, the things that came up. The other thing about We the Animals, it's very short, and when it was accepted for publication, they didn't think it was going to do very well because it's not a traditional length. And so I think if you're someone who's writing slightly shorter manuscripts, it's very inspirational in that sense. And Justin Torres is very influenced by poetry, so it has a very poetic, lyrical quality to the prose. And the thing that we're going to focus on next week, which I'm not going to say a whole lot, but character reversal is something that I think is really interesting in fiction and memoir and poetry. So I'm just going to, this Vanity Fair thing, I'm going to read something less impressively than Donna. It's a blurb. A gorgeous, howling, coming of age novel that will devour your heart. Yeah, probably good reading for right now.
Charlotte, can you explain that term you just said? Was it character reversal? What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, do you, when we're writing fiction in particular, do we do things that surprise ourselves? So we think, I don't want to say too much about We the Animals because there's a reversal coming. But if you think one character is going in this direction as a reader, how do you build the credibility so that when they do pivot, it feels believable, but it's also very uplifting and satisfying? So how do you create a complex character enough so that they can change the direction of where we think they're headed as a reader? Mm-hmm. If people want to read some really weird stuff, The Last Bad Man by Miranda July if you want to see character reversal, like on so many levels. And that book was really instructive for me in my last novel, because some of my scenes were really flat. And I was like, well, what would Miranda July do in this scene? Yeah, she'd have the main character make out with her father's doctor. Okay, let's try that. And so, and it just makes you uncomfortable. So does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the recommendation. Renee, what have you got for us?
So I get to bring in the poetry.
Yay.
All right. So I love this writer. This poet is one of my favorite poets. Let me see. And I just got her new book. Let's see if I can get there we go. Right. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
So Letters to a Young Brown Girl, Barbara Jane Reyes. This book is out next month from a DOA. BOA. It is absolutely beautiful. It's her 6th collection of poetry. And I didn't know that we were going to be able to read poems, or rather read pieces. So I've got to read to you all my favorite poem in this. Let me see where it is. I just had it and then I dropped it. And then also I just wrapped up, like just an hour ago. I interviewed her for The Rumpus, and that'll be out end of this month, early next month if y'all want to read. But she's a Filipino poet based in Oakland, and just amazing language. This is from the middle of the book. Brown girl sings whale song. When they say you are as big as a lumpy, blubbery whale, you may go ahead and bellow deep, creak, croon and trill, moan low. Go ahead, open your mouth so wide that you can swallow the sea. Know that your blood pulls you through what your oldest ancestors committed to heart. Remember, you have touched the ocean floor and you have made your garden there. Remember, your skin is thick. Remember, no one has tamed you. Yes, you are immense, your lifespan and memory long, your heart larger than a full-grown man. Your lungs carry air for us all. Your rib cage could be a refuge. Your skull is a cavern of deep song. Through murk and poison, you move true with the moon. Your body lights a million lanterns. Your deep-pitched song finds your sisters, your mother. They say the earth's most unruly parts sing like you.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, she's gorgeous because all of her work has this beautiful blend of nature, of myth, and of history. So she'll do a beautiful poem like that and then bring it in with a poem about, colonization and violence and women's bodies and history, and just all of it just is so beautifully and intricately woven. But this book is split into 3 parts, and the last part of it is directed to young brown girl poets. So it's sort of all the lessons that she's learned as a poet over the last 20 some years of speaking, writing, and publishing. And just, it's just this beautiful, beautiful book. So, so I completely recommend that to everyone. All of her books to everyone.
Awesome. Thank you. That was beautiful. I just want to listen to you guys read all day. That's what I want. Yeah, and I love, so the Rumpus interview is going to come out at the end of this month?
End of this month, early next month.
Cool. Love it. If you share that link with me, I'll send it to everyone from the retreat. Donna, what do you got?
Well, first I want to say, as ire'ne was reading, I just thought, my God, that's what words can do, I mean, you're just transported. That's what poetry can do, Yeah, I also want to say, comment on Charlotte's choice, We the Animals. I've taught that prologue before. That is, by God, the most beautiful prologue of any book I think I have ever read. And Justin told me, I was at a reading right after the book came out, and you probably know this, Charlotte, that it basically said it was a work of autofiction. He wrote it and he gave it to his mother, and she was like, what are you doing? I can't even step outside my door anymore, right? I'm so embarrassed. And he said, oh, Mama, it's fiction. And she said, oh, good. And and then she was giving the books to all the neighbors once he told her it was fiction. So it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I'm going to follow ire'ne with my second selection is two books. I kind of cheated a little. It's Life on Earth by Tracy K. Smith.
Art.
It's a book, they're both books of poetry. Basically in this book, it won the Pulitzer. She's a phenomenal poet. And in this book, she sort of envisions the future in a kind of sci-fi sort of way, and imagines sort of a music of the universe. She uses, look at my notes, she uses dark matter as a powerful image all the way through. It's written, her father worked on the Hubble telescope, so it's a book of mourning. But it's not sad because it's so beautiful, right? I mean, it's so beautiful. This one, so Tracy K. Smith, Life on Mars. I got to hear her read at Michener last winter, I guess. And I was so glad that I actually got out of my house and went someplace. Remember when we could go places?
No. Can I say something really quick about that book?
Sure.
I love that book. Partly because my dad also worked on the Hubble telescope, and I feel this real kinship with Tracy K. Smith and how she talks about her astronomer father. But she has an amazing podcast called The Slowdown. If you guys haven't listened to it, every day she starts by just talking just about the world and her like musings for that day, and then she reads a different poem, by another poet, and it's just a really nice way to start the day. And I try to start the day with that more often than I start the day with news. So just
nice.
A little recommendation there. Go ahead, Donna.
Nice. So the second part of my second collection is by the poet Marie Howe, What the Living Do. And I read this book a lot when it came out. I had lost a lot of family, like within a few months. And it's a wonderful accompaniment through a period of grieving. But the thing is, it's what the living do, right? So it's full of the sort of everyday beauty of life, the combing of hair, you know, that the taking of a walk, you know. It's so even though it's a book of mourning, it's not bleak. It's actually, like Tracy K. Smith, it's a celebration of still being here, and of the celebration of remembering, really. One of the reasons, again, that I chose these books is because, you know, poetry uses a heightened language, and many of the best memoirists, you know, if they're not poets, they're highly influenced, as Charlotte was saying, by poetry. When I was writing my first book, and I've started doing this with the eternal second book, I would sort of prime the pump by reading poetry every day to kind of break apart, and to break my mind of its sort of dogged insistence on the facts of what happened. To realize it's about, I think somebody posted in here, it's about what I do with what happened on the page with these things called words. And anyway, it just was a wonderful way to start my writing day.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I tend to, when I'm writing prose, I tend to read poetry. And when I'm writing poetry, I tend to read prose.
Interesting.
Like my brain likes the contrast.
Yeah, it's a cross-fertilization that happens, I think.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Donna. Poetry's getting a lot of love today, as it should.
It is.
Charlotte, what do you have for us?
I want to say a couple things about poetry. I tend to have, when I'm working on a prose project, I tend to find a collection of poetry by a single poet that becomes like my muse book. So Christian Wyman's book, Once in the West, was really influenced the memoir that I wrote when I was writing my latest novel. There's actually one poem from Tracy K. Smith, and it's like a reimagining of God that was so resonant that I was like, oh, that's the poem I'm reading before, you know. So I just encourage this to people, and also for folks who find your poetry. And it's such a beautiful thing in our lives. If you've ever felt like I don't get what poetry is, like that means you just haven't met your poet, your poetry, and it can teach you so much as a writer. I don't have a copy of the next book that I'm going to recommend, but it is a book of poetry. And it is by Jason Reynolds, who's primarily known as a YA author. And it's a book called For Everyone. And it was originally performed at the Kennedy Center for the unveiling of the MLK Memorial, and later as a tribute to Walter Dean Myers. It is very, very, very short. It is electric in its uplifting message. It is, and the thing there, it says, great for a graduation gift, and it is. But I think I also realized I put another YA book on there because I'm thinking a lot about young people right now, and particularly brown young people, and how tender their creativity is. And like, if we can keep, like that book, Jason Reynolds' book is just so affirming. And I think as writers, we need affirmation as much as possible. So it's a great book. And I would show it to you, but I gave it to somebody who needed it. So, and if you don't know Jason Reynolds' work, he did that book, co-wrote, is it Stamped from the Beginning with Imre Kendi, and who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Yeah.
And he's doing a lot right now on Instagram. He has a young person's imagination meditation, which is available to anyone. So if you feel like you want to connect to a writer who is very, very generous and who's hilarious, because he's like, I thought I was going to grow up and be Queen Latifah, but I'm a writer. He just has a lot of generosity of spirit. So I would highly recommend For Everyone. See what I did there?
We
Yeah,
all saw it.
that's great.
We all saw
I
it.
think I'm hilarious.
We all saw it. Thank you. ire'ne, what
So
do you
that's
got for us?
That's a natural lead into my next book, which is a YA novel.
Running.
So we have Natalia Sylvester's Running, which is really interesting for several different reasons. One is that, especially during an election year, it is the plot has to do with a 15-year-old whose Cuban American father is running for president. And through the course of the book, she comes to articulate what her own political beliefs are, and they are not quite in agreement with her father's. So that is just like this great plot for a story. What does that mean when it's politics, it's family, it's her discovery of herself as an activist and as a political being. From a craft point of view, one of the things that I find really fascinating, not just about this book, but all of her books, is that they're a very interesting intersection between write what you know and write what you don't know at all. So it's how do we bridge that? Because we don't want to keep writing the same story. And at the same time, we want to have enough of enough empathy and enough of a connection to the story that we can write it from a very personal place. And so I think that book is an excellent example of that. She told me that the initial moment of inspiration for the book was that she was watching Ted Cruz or Mark Rubio or somebody, talking, and that their daughter was in the crowd. And the camera for a second lingered on the face of the daughter. And so she had this moment of wondering, what was that daughter, maybe preteen, 12, 13 years old. What was she thinking about this campaign and that election, and what does she believe? And so I like I said, it's an interesting intersection of what you do know and what you don't know.
I love it. I'm hoping to, Natalia is just so wonderful, and she's also really great to listen to talk about craft, and I enjoy the chance to listen to her. So I'm trying to lure her to one of our lunchtime sessions during this month,
nice.
But we'll see if I succeed. I know the book just came out, so she might be a little too busy doing important things, but she's pretty awesome. Thank you. Donna Johnson.
Okay, my third selection is actually, I think is often talked about, was often talked about when it came out as a long lyric poem. It's Jane, a Murder by Maggie Nelson. And I tell you, I love all things Maggie Nelson. So it may have been considered a long lyric poem then, and it's written in stanzas, but there are several other memoirs written in much the same way now. So I don't know if it really is a long lyric poem, but I guess that kind of doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sure it was the marketing people trying to decide what to do with it. So this is a book about, in some ways, a real person and a made-up person, which on paper, that's kind of what we all are. But so Jane was her aunt, and she was killed at like 22, maybe 24. And she was killed, and they thought she was a victim of a mass murderer. As it turned out, she wasn't. But that's another book. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful book. Let me back up. Maggie Nelson was born 4 years after Jane's murder, and Jane's murder cast a very long shadow over that family, and especially over Maggie Nelson herself, who was often compared to Jane by her grandfather. So one of the things I love about this book is the lyricism and the language and the innovation that she uses. For students and for all of us, it's a really good sort of primer on bringing in outside sources and documents and using them for your own purposes, right? She uses Jane's journals starting from when Jane was 13. But she is constructing the person Jane in her mind. She's not trying to find out who she really was, because that's impossible, right? So she's using all of these different sources for her own ends. And will you let me read a little more?
Of course, yeah. Okay.
So this is the first part. So Jane was shot, and the first part is entitled, The Light of the Mind, 4 Dreams. And so I'm just gonna read one little part. She had been shot once in the front and once in the back of the head. She wondered, trying to find someone to remove the slugs from her skull. She was not dead yet, but she feared she was dying. The holes in her head were perfectly round and bloodless, with burnt, flared edges, 2 eclipses. The passage of air through the holes felt peculiar, just dimly painful, like chewing hot or cold food on a cavity, the sensation of space where it had once been dense and full. Sunlight shot around the circumference of each black rind, so that a long shaft of pale light cast out from the center of her forehead, and another shaft streamed behind her. Is this the light of the mind? Is this the light of my mind? That's in italics. So I was a genius after all. The thought made her smile, but then she wondered, why had the light always been invisible? I must have been squandering it. I must have only felt its vaguest rotations. Now, what can I do with it? If I could find a lampshade, someone could read by it. I might illuminate entire rooms, entire dungeons. I shine so bright. But in fact, she was losing the light. It leaked everywhere, unstoppable. Isn't that amazing?
I love that book. Yeah, I've read it. It's pretty special.
I read and reread it, and she brings in Jane's journals. She brings in the work of other writers. She does quote Edgar Allan Poe. We were talking the other day about whether you can just wholesale quote other people without getting permission. Perhaps Edgar's estate gave them permission. It's anyway, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Thanks, Donna. Charlotte Gullick.
And a radical change from, I brought some poetry. No, it's not true. I have an early version of Michael Knowles' book. So
Oh,
The Writer's
good.
Field Guide to the Craft of Fiction. And I'm using 2 exercises out of it for my class. And I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. If you're a short story writer, if you're a novelist trying to figure out how to write scenes, or if you're trying to revise. His, it's amazing because he's collected all these incredible examples that he's drawing from. So you get a taste of so many different kinds of writers. And Michael has just really studied the craft of these pieces. So it's like having your own personal field guide with you as you're trying to figure things out. And I would say, I've used this in classes at ACC. People absolutely love it. And I would say, if you get this, I'll tell you that the exercises are a little prescriptive in the sense they're a little bit tight and like, first do this, do that. But what I use it for, if I need to generate stuff, I'll follow his steps exactly. But if I need to revise something, I'll go in and see what the steps are and then interpret them as a revision tool. So I just think it's got a breadth of material that's having trouble, really potent. And he talks about writing in such a way that he makes it, to me, feel very accessible. And if you're one of those people who feel like you would be a more legit writer if you went to an MFA, that's probably a lie. But he talks a lot about—
Can you say that a little louder?
Yeah, okay. If you feel like you would be more legit if you had an MFA, that's a lie. You don't need to have an MFA in order to be a legit writer. And Michael brings in his MFA experience, and he's respectful of it, but he's also, he critiques it in an interesting way. So I kind of think of it as like a little bit of a peek into an MFA program as well. So he does, like, it's unlike any other writing book, and that it allows you to— I think most of us think of storytelling as kind of like this, unless you're a memoirist, kind of horizontal. And he gives you so many exercises that you can go vertical with the work. And it's, I guess I'll just put in some. I'm a fan.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
ire'ne, what do you got for us?
Tonight's workshop for my group is going to focus on world building. And as I tell people, we often think about world building just applying to sci-fi or fantasy worlds, but it's everything, memoir, fiction, an essay, poetry. Everything requires world building because you have to bring the world of your work to the reader. And so I wanted to share with you one of the most audacious examples I've seen of that recently. And that is, let me see if I can not catch the glare. It's called Michael and Josephine by Giordias Boitel. It is a 75-page poetry collection that she calls a novel in verse. And so listen to what she does. She manages to build a world where she reimagines Saint Michael, the angel, the archangel, as a lesbian woman, divine figure who falls in love with Josephine, who is an emergency relief worker. And so the book is their love story, told in poems.
Wow.
And so let me share one of those. Before Josephine, Saint Michael wasn't lucky in love. Not unlucky exactly. That's not right either. But women want some attention. Eventually, a disruption in the world blossoms, and there are wars at every corner, and the dead need to be led to the after, and there are children without loved ones, and there is blood in the waterways, and there are earthquakes tearing into soft stone. Putting all this aside is difficult. Her face wounded even as she falls into the tenderness, a woman asking, "How was your day, sweetheart?" The moment rage crawls from its damp space, she is compelled to answer. Impossible to toss that duty aside, to not humble herself to its pain, to not respond, leaving her lovers full of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Just this tiny little, but yes, I mean, it's just amazing how she manages to tell the entire story of their relationship in these tiny poems, in this tiny book. I mean, if it's in your back pocket, it's so small.
How did you
but
find that book?
actually, this is a friend of mine. It was a friend of mine who
Oh yeah.
wrote this book. So she's actually got my blurb on there too. What did I write about it? Michael and Josephine is a story of what every great love is. The clash of the everyday and the divine. The push and the pull of what our lives demand and what our hearts long for. The hurt of everything we fight for and what we do not fight hard enough for. In these poems, Giordias Boitel wields a pen that is feather light and scalpel sharp to dissect love, cauterize memory, and examine the unknowable.
Oh, I love it.
So,
Damn, you're a good writer
I
already.
know. We should have you. Everyone
blurbs
should
are
have you
torturous.
blurb.
Blurbs are torture.
That's
I
beautiful.
try not never to write them because they take forever.
They do take forever. They do.
Thank you for sharing. Donna, do you have anything else for us?
I do. I'm very excited about this because I've broken the rules, and my last pick is a movie, actually. I Am Not Your Negro. It's directed by Raoul Peck, and the words that he uses are my adored one, come from my adored one, James Baldwin. He chooses work from works both published and unpublished that Baldwin has written in his lifetime. So this movie came out in 2016, and I saw it twice because I needed to. It's a powerful, I'm going to speak to the structure and then to the content. It's a powerful example of how structure can augment and strengthen content and theme, I think. It's a fractured collage structure, and it jump cuts through the deaths of three of Baldwin's friends, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X in between. Baldwin had been living in France and was much more comfortable living in Paris as a Black man than he was here. But with these deaths and the civil rights movement, he felt called to come back to the US, and he felt called to sort of give a testimony, if you will, of regarding racism and the Black experience in the US. So the film has, it has his memories of these men, but it also jump cuts between these memories and scenes from the civil rights movement and scenes from Baldwin talking to Dick Cavett, which is still, I think, the most amazing talk show ever. I mean, I realized I was a little young to be watching Dick Cavett when he was around, but oh my God, the interviews were spectacular. So there's Baldwin holding forth in a way, honestly, that we haven't seen a Black celebrity, I don't think, since talk about racism in that way so publicly. Well, maybe we have, I guess. There have been a couple, but not in between. There were years and years, right? So he also, in this mixture of narrative threads, he also weaves in, the director weaves in more recent footage that brings in, I believe, maybe scenes from Black Lives Matter, and also people talking about the more recent murders of Black men. And so it was sort of shocking in 2016 for people, white people, to think about this, right? And you saw it and you realized, oh my God, it's not something new that's happening. There's a continuity about it. It's been going on since the days of slavery, the murders of Black people. So it's, disturbing content, and disturbing in the best of ways, right? It makes you think about things in a different way. When I first saw it, there are so many cut jumps that it was a little hard to follow. So I went and I watched it again, as I said earlier, because creatively, sometimes the best work isn't the work that reveals itself right away. So you have to really be thinking of who your reader is or your viewer is, because it takes some patience on the part of the viewer and on the part of the reader to get some of these deeper works that are written almost more vertically than they are horizontally. Yeah, it's tremendous. And they also released a book, but you can't really get it in the books because these are fragments of different pieces of work. So you really need to see the movie. It's on Netflix right now. I guess I've seen it 3 times. I actually just watched it again about a month ago.
Can I ask you a question, Donna?
No. Yeah.
So we have been talking, and you were, it just, when you first read Baldwin, there was something about the spiritual language that really resonated with you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just like give us a sentence or 2 on that, or is that too much? Oh, now she froze.
Froze Donna.
Hello?
Froze Donna. Your question froze Donna.
Too much. You
Sorry.
froze Donna, Charlotte.
Charlotte.
And that look
I
on
guess
her
I don't have
face.
to answer that.
Oh, okay. You're back. Well, the look on your face was like, how dare you ask me that? That's how it froze. So.
Well, actually, on my end, you were frozen.
Oh, okay.
So what was the question? Because you froze and I couldn't hear it.
Well, that there's something about reading Baldwin for the first time that gave you access to your own storyline because of the spiritual language.
Yeah, I kind of hesitate to say this. I was born a poor white child in the South, and that comes right from The Jerk. Remember that? And I read a lot of literature from the 19th century growing up, I think, and early 20th century literature about the 19th century. There just weren't that many books that I had access to. And honestly, I'm going to go back a little. I'm really going to go out on the edge here. The first time I saw or read something that seemed like it was a familiar experience was when I read actually Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Because sometimes the line between poor whites and poor blacks in the South can be very permeable, or at least then. I wouldn't speak to now, but it was a shock. And then to see some of my experience and the way in which she talked about that experience, I understood her language in a way I had not before. And then as a later reader, reading Baldwin's, I want to say Go Tell It on the Mountain. So Baldwin was a child preacher and he was the son of a preacher. And so a lot of Baldwin's prose has the cadence of that call and response that you see in Pentecostal and Black churches. It has that rhythm. And Baldwin also uses many of the phrases from religion because that's his first language. And it was my first language growing up in church, literally all day. So hearing his language was the first time again that I realized you could draw from that well, that it might actually serve you as a creative person at some point. It was very freeing. Both of those books were super freeing to me. And I realized it sounds like I'm claiming the Black experience. I don't mean to do that at all. I just mean that I just didn't read a lot of books about poor white kids,
Well, thank you for answering that question.
How long could I go on? I'm done.
No,
Thank you.
no, that was great, Donna. Thank you. Charlotte, what else? What are you gonna round it out with?
So just to kind of segue, Donna's words made me think about something that came up that last night is like how important it is to see your own experience reflected on the page. And there may be crossover in some areas that are surprising to some people. Like for me, reading about children who are in the potential for a lot of violence and reading about how they have kind of made coherence out of that is was important to me. And Melissa Febo, she has a thing, she says, write the book that you needed when you were 12 or 13 or 14. When you finally feel that resonance of your own experience, it's really powerful. So my last recommendation is Elements of Fiction by Walter Mosley. And I'm going to choose to read something because I think it's funny and connected. So he has, this is a guy that he's famous for his mystery series. So just to drive a point home, here's a little bit out of his chapter on description as poetry. Poetry is at the heart of all writing. Passion, detail, music, just the right word, a sense of play, and a sense of tragedy that take us beyond even the pale of death. Without poetry in our words, our songs, our love lives, life would become impossibly dull, calcified, and worthless. And then he has this line, you need poetry in your life or your words will never sing with the divinity of the ordinary. That's from a mystery writer. So if you're one of those people like, they should stop talking about poetry, there you go.
How weird that there was this synchronicity among us, right? In terms of poetry today.
So Charlotte, what about that book though? What does Walter Mosley do in that book?
He builds a little bit on his previous one called This Year You Write Your Novel. Mm-hmm. And he kind of breaks it down into manageable chunks. He does in that book and he does in this one too. And he does, I think for me, the work is very validating. Like, it's a chapter like, this novel is bigger than your head. Like talking about how hard it is to manage a whole project and the strategies for that. And he's also, one of the really beautiful things in this book is he talks a lot about how the child needs to be present along with the adult. It's the child who will tumble down the hill and see what's going to happen to test gravity. And that's kind of our job as writers. So there's a lot of he really puts forth the idea of wonder and a sense of play as you write fiction. And then he gives you some pretty practical things about how drafts works. Like, you need drafts to discover what's important. You're not going to find that out on a first draft. And he has, he breaks it down into voice, character, context, setting. And that the chapters are short, and I guess what part of my favorite thing about it is he makes me feel like I can do it. Mm. He's like, it's conversational, but it's also wise. And he's writing from this vista of experience. And he's like, if you just keep trusting yourself and think about character this time, it'll work out. And I'm like, thanks, Walter. I don't know if he would be offended that I call him by his first name, but
I think he'd love that. I love also that you have brought up a couple different craft books today. And I think it's for me as a writer who is nowhere near as accomplished as each of you, it's just reassuring also to see that you do still go to craft books and to, sort of back to that well and see what other people are offering. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Ire'ne, where would you like to end for today?
So I had one book in mind, which I will mention because I actually am reading one of the new books that I've gotten. And that is, and I'm loving the language. I'm about a third of the way in. I'm loving the language because it's this beautiful, sparse, but sometimes poetic language. There's a quote that I love from Jeanette Winterson, who talks about how all writing is poetry, but that if you need your characters to open a door, just have them open the door. Like, just have them be in the world and do their thing. And I'm loving this, right? It's Kelly Jo Ford, Crooked Hallelujah. Let me see. It's one of my Kindle picks that I actually am reading. But yes, I'm loving the writing in that, and we'll see how that goes. And it's getting some pretty good reviews too. But I wanted to jump in really quick and recommend that. Perfect, thank you. I also wanted to recommend one book on craft, and I recommend this book all the time. I actually read it the first time maybe 19 years ago, Writing Past Dark by Bonnie Friedman. And it's just amazing essays, or amazing chapters about all the difficult parts of writing. How do you write when you're afraid? How do you write when envy is overpowering? How do you write when you're afraid of what your family or your friends or your loved ones are going to think about your work? you know, takes all of those difficult things and you know, thinks over them. And I think I read it actually, the first time I read it, my mother was terminal in the hospital. So it was a traumatic time for me to read it. But also it was really necessary then, I think, because, you know, certain life events convince you about what, you know, what work you need to do or the writer you need to become. And so that writer, that book just crossed my path at that exact moment that I needed it. Interestingly, maybe 5 years later, I was in San Antonio for a writing workshop. And out of nowhere, I didn't even know she was there. The author just walked down the hallway of the university that I was visiting. And I just saw her and thought, that looks like Bonnie Friedman. She apparently was teaching a writing workshop to a group of nuns at the UTSA campus downtown. So out of nowhere, I was like, oh my God, this is Bonnie Friedman. So I dragged her to, I think her and I dragged a couple of the nuns that were with her. I dragged her to the group that I was with and just like gave testimony, like it's right then and there about how important this woman's book had been to me and how often I had recommended it. So yeah, that's the book that I pull out about, you know, before all others about writing.
I love that story. I love the image of you dragging Bonnie Friedman and a couple
And
of
her
nuns
nuns.
down the hallway. It's like every writer's sort of dream, right? To have someone come rushing up to them and say, oh my gosh, it's you, Bonnie Friedman. That's wonderful. Thank you. You guys are the best. I really want to thank you for taking the time today because I know that you have a lot going on, and also just say that I'm inspired just listening to you talk about books that have inspired you. And I'm sure there are people on webinars somewhere else talking to students about how your books have inspired them. So thank you so much for sharing. And I shared the link to the bookshop.org link, the store that you guys can go to if you want to support Bookwoman. But of course, you know, if there's another indie bookstore out there that you would like to support, just find these books in that shop and go to it. And also you'll find our instructors' books there as well. And this was really lovely. Thank you to the three of you for spending your lunchtime with us. Everybody from the retreat, you'll hear a little more about what our lunchtime session will be next week and the following week from me later this week or early next week. And then remember to hang out with us on Thursday night and then also Friday game night. So thanks, everyone. That's it. Lunchtime session done.
Thank you, Becca.
Thanks, Becca.
Of course. Yeah. Bye, guys. Have a good rest of your day and enjoy your class tonight, ire'ne. I'm excited to hear how it goes. All right.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.